to start, so that's exactly what we're going to do. My name is Jay Frost, and as you may know, I've been to this party before. I'm the host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by DonorSearch. We don't usually talk much about DonorSearch here. We have a great opportunity today because of the panel that's sitting here, a group of friends who are leaders in the field of fundraising and philanthropy. The reason we don't typically do it, frankly, is because since 2016, DonorSearch has simply provided a platform where we can have sandbox discussions with you about the issues that are really important to us in this field. It's very rare that we get a chance to do it with people who have been really making and shaping philanthropy in all these really positive ways over the years, and we're doing that today at this exceptional place that we're not going to see. So I can look out the window and see water and palm trees, and unfortunately you can't. But we are here at this beautiful resort in Florida for the Accordant Leadership Retreat with three exceptional people here in the center of the table. Betsy is, of course, the CEO of Accordant, and we'll talk to each of them about their work. Bill TeDesco, of course, the CEO of DonorSearch, which lets us put on this series, and Nathan Chappell, who you may know in a variety of ways, but also is the Senior Vice President at DonorSearchAi and the author of course, The Generosity Crisis, which you may have on your bookshelf, and if you don't, shame on you. So with that, maybe we'll just jump right in. The subject of today, I think, has one of our longest titles, but that's because there's a lot of ground to cover. And that's Unlocking the Power of Grateful Patient Fundraising, AI, Innovations, and Proven Strategies for Healthcare Impact. We're doing that right here at the Accordant Leadership Retreat. So Betsy, do you mind telling us a bit about, first of all, the retreat, why we're here, as well as maybe a little bit about Accordant for those who don't know your work?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jay. Accordant is a health philanthropy consulting firm. We work with hospitals and a lot of other health-affiliated organizations to advance vibrant philanthropy. And we get together about this time every year with a small group of people for an executive summit to really talk about the trends and issues, what's going on in the field, how we need to rethink our work, how we need to lean into our work in a different way. So it's a time for us to come together and recalibrate, re-energize, to go back out and do the good work we have to do.
And why here?
On one hand, I will say, the lazy answer is because it's close to where I live. So, and who wouldn't want to come to Florida in February?
Right. And this is, and I never remember how to pronounce the name of the resort. That's my fault.
It's the Ponte Vedra Inn and Club.
Thank you, Ponte Vedra,
yes.
Which is a gorgeous place for, I guess, for reflection as much as anything else. And this is an important time to reflect on this field. And I know we're going to jump into that. Before we do, Bill, would you mind saying something about DonorSearch for those who don't know anything about the company?
Sure. DonorSearch is a company that's dedicated to providing prospect research, prospect management, as well as AI solution-based tools to exclusively the nonprofit market. We've been in business for 15 years, we have about 70 employees, and about 10,000 clients.
And a big chunk of them I know are in healthcare, which is one of the reasons that we're all
here. Absolutely. This conference, thank you for inviting us. Yes. We really appreciate it. It's exhausting because there's so much good information that is coming from the speakers, and at the same time, we've actually had an opportunity to. We invited a client down, Dan Lentz from Minnesota Children's, and he had an opportunity to kind of share with folks some of the successes that he's had. So, it's an excellent place, and it's 75 degrees out and no humidity. It's gorgeous.
And this is a way of torturing you, but we please don't let that be reflected in the reviews of this session. This is really just to encourage you to come together things like this one, because they're very special, and you're covering a lot of territory, and a big chunk of that is about being very thoughtful about the information that is embedded in the personalities of the people who love the work we do and support the missions of organizations. And that's kind of the cornerstone of your work. So do you mind kind of introducing where you are? What is DonorSearchAi? Maybe that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I mean, well, gosh, where do I start actually is the question. So after spending this in the nonprofit field, leading fundraising teams for almost 20 years. My work in AI really came as a means to an end, because essentially as I was leading teams, we were continuing to find ourselves needing to raise more money every year. So our goal always increased from a shrinking pool of donors. So really about 2017, with just a need to figure out a new approach, started working and learning about artificial intelligence. And so DonorSearchAi is many evolutions forward from that moment, where we have really best in class, best practices around using AI to essentially measure connection of individuals that would support a hospital. And it's healthcare philanthropy is near and dear to my heart. It's where I spent a lot of my professional career, in the health sciences and in just in medicine in general. And so, and there's a lot of a lot of nuances in fundraising in healthcare that are learned over time. And so, being able to apply AI in a very informed and responsible way is something that our team at DonorSearchAi takes a lot of pride in. So we're not just people, outsiders that think we know best for this industry, but we're actually grown up in this industry, are very protective of it, and essentially have pioneered new ways to essentially measure connection. And then working with partners like Betsy and her team help take those data insights to that next level through best practices and things like that.
This term best practices is one that keeps coming back. It reminds me of a lot of words that we don't really well define. Yeah. And then, and that's not a criticism, because I use it all the time. And I wonder if maybe that's because we're not really agreed on what is best, but also because it's evolutionary. I mean, we didn't have a set of tools, a set of information, or even maybe all the ways of thinking about these things that we do today before. We were talking before we got started, you were talking a little bit about this in terms of another term we use a lot, about authenticity, about having these authentic relationships with donors. Would you mind talking about that a bit and why that's important, but also what does that really mean?
Sure.
How is that reflected in your work?
Absolutely. I think donors step forward to do work that is aligned with their own values, their own beliefs, their own purpose, their desire to affect change in the world. And so in our role as philanthropy leaders, we really act as conduits or catalysts to enable them to do the good that they have in mind. And so I think you've got to approach that in a very thoughtful and authentic way, that it's about finding that commonality where we can stand shoulder to shoulder, looking out in the same direction, not necessarily pulling you to do what I want to do, or me being pulled to do what you want to do, but to find that common ground where we go forward in a very mutually beneficial and respectful way to affect good change for the greater good.
So the converse of that, have we fallen into that habit? I mean, we've been selling instead of, we've been using sticks instead of carrots. I don't know what the analogy is. How have we been drawing people in or not?
I think we have sometimes gone about this in the wrong way. Nathan and I were even talking about this morning, that we have an opportunity to really approach this as relationship-based fund development. However, we've seen a lot of work very transactional. Some of it is manipulative. Some of it is using even gratitude as a lever to get to someone instead of recognizing the virtue that exists in gratitude. So I think we've got to be very clear about our objective to kind of find this way forward together, instead of using tools or processes or best practices or data or anything else to take someone somewhere they don't want to go.
How did we get to this point? Just talking about the problem first before we get to the solution. How do we get to a point where people are using gratitude as kind of lever to get things they want, instead of as a way to kind of open an opportunity for a relationship?
I think it's almost an act of desperation. So much of fundraising is art, and then when somebody comes in that doesn't understand the art, then they kind of shift over here to the levers, what essentially what you're just describing. And there's an opportunity now. We can understand much more about who's interested, why they're interested, their connection, their partnership with the nonprofit, and it's an opportunity to kind of change the flow here. Nathan was talking about it earlier. There's a possibility, and I don't think there's any empirical evidence, maybe there is, but that the shrinking pool of donors, hypothetically, it could be a function of that. It could be a function of people just saying, you know what, that's enough. Let's go do something else with disposable income or gratitude. I mean, you even see, you know, to some degree, you have the for-profit platforms that, you know, the GoFundMe's and the like. There's a reason they're so popular, and nonprofits have a declining number of donors. That I don't know what the reason is, but you could hypothesize.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. This isn't to knock if you've done something like that, essentially a crowdfunding experiment, or it's a part of your, you know, your tool set. But where does that fit in this conversation? Because it is huge.
I mean, again, just my perspective on this. You know, in not to shamelessly pitch the generosity crisis, but we did a lot of studying when we were preparing to when we were writing the book. And sites like GoFundMe process one transaction per second, 24/7. A lot of those transactions, a vast majority, 60% or more, are not going through nonprofits. They're going direct to the impact of an individual. So I think there's a change in that, this idea that I want to be generous. I innately believe that generosity is pro-social behavior, that we're built to be generous, but I want to see the impact. And I think, you know, and I reflect on my career, all too often, you know, I'm absolutely to blame as much as a lot of organizations I've seen of not truly stewarding, steward a moment of gratitude, but not the partnership that we portray, that we wanted to bring donor into. And so we, in essence, made it very transactional and made giving very transactional. And I see that a lot. And so if you are a person that wants to be generous, that wants to make a difference, you might go into GoFundMe to know if I give it to this person, they'll receive it, like, not like in 10 days or whatever, they're going to receive it in 10 seconds. And I know that the money that they received made a difference. And I do think there's a change that this idea of gratitude is changing, in the sense that people want to feel, as people trust the outside world or less, they want people to come in closer. And when they come in closer, they want philanthropy to feel local. And I was talking with an organization last week where the phrase, you know, the future of philanthropy is local, and it really hit home, because that's immediately when we feel like we're counted on to be to help make a difference, and that my contributions make a difference. And I think organizations have found that very hard to do. That to make, even for especially for large organizations, how does a large organization make philanthropy feel personal? How do they make it feel local? And so bringing it down to, like, I'm important, I'm a partner of this organization. And so there's a lot of work to do. And I think these 2 days together are really, honestly, having honest conversations about things that are not going right well, and coming up with ideas of things that could, you know, kind of change that paradigm.
Let's just put it in for 1 second to say that if you are listening live, and we would love to hear from you. So I see that there are a couple questions in the Q&A already. I haven't looked at those yet. I am going to bring those in. Also, if you have anything you'd just like to say and chat with one another, please do use the chat for that. We really do want you to participate, and especially because this is an important conversation for all of us. You may be in healthcare, you may not, but it's still going to relate to you. And when it comes to philanthropy specifically, it's happening in your community as well. It's affecting the level of care that you get at your community health center, whatever that is. And so this conversation is directly related not only to us professionally, but to us personally in our family. So as you were touching on all this, one thing that strikes me is that there seems to be a disconnect as our institutions, in that word, as organizations mature, they develop processes which in theory should make them more efficient, more effective. They get the technology, they get the staff, they do all these things that we might see as good for growing an organization. But it doesn't always feel very local. So when you've had the conversation over the last day, and when you have tomorrow, I'm curious how you bring that to a smaller organization. Let's say it's a community hospital or community health center, or a small, that kind of level of service provision. How do you help them to make sure that they stay close to the people that they're serving in the community where they serve, so that these requests are authentic, that these enhancements they make aren't removed from the level of care and the level of connection they have?
I think Nathan's hit it in some part, that just going to the simple word trust. Really effective fund development is not necessarily about having a big organization or a big budget. It is about, again, building those trusting relationships even with others. And one of the things that we see in the data coming out of give.org is that they say 80% of donors who've given $5,000 or more say it is essential for them to trust the charitable organization that they're participating with. And yet only 22% say they actually trust the organization they're participating with. And so to me, I think we've got to almost harken back to the fundamentals of basic relationship management, establishing credibility, demonstrating follow through, being good stewards of resources, articulating what our intentions are and what the impact would be. To just go back to the basics rather than depending on something that's going to be like whiz bang. There are a lot of simple things we can do that set us on the right course.
As you're saying this, it also strikes me that all of you aren't just doing this work today, you've done it throughout your careers. So Bill, I know that in your career before DonorSearch Days, Wealth Engine, all of that, you spent time working on that and within healthcare arm of the university system.
Yeah.
So do you mind taking us back a little bit to what it was like building those relationships then? Maybe even inform whatever kind of data or tools you had back then, which are not like today's, and then the difference you see between that and now, and how we can make sure that we're doing what I'm sure you were doing back then.
So I'll blend two experiences together. We'll do the School of Medicine, and then the Fund for Educational Excellence. And it really comes down to is you were, aside from, at the first job I had in fundraising, they gave me kind of the guidelines and how things should be done, but they didn't have any technical background. And you're working largely in the dark, devoid of information. I mean, you got 2 or 3 variables, and those fields or that information that you knew about the donor was how you made decisions about whether or not you were going to spend money to approach the individuals. It would be an overstatement to say that I had the same experience at the University of Maryland. I'm sure it's much better now. I certainly wouldn't be there if it wasn't better. But we were totally devoid of information about the constituency. I mean, it was remarkable to me, and I could have done a better job of adjusting to that, but I didn't, and it just wasn't. It's just horrible.
And maybe if I could jump in too, because if I think about
no, let me say
oh,
more.
Sorry.
no, I do appreciate you jumping in. There's a memory there, Jay. I mean,
sorry, I hit a nerve, Bill.
Yeah.
I think it's a really important opportunity to reflect in how, going back to the operative word trust, if in void of that information and insights into an individual, philanthropy was almost entirely based on trust, and always had been for forever. Just, do I know you? Are you reputable? Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? In that time, I think we've seen the pendulum swing so far to transactional, and Jay, you were asking about the transactional aspect, that I think, and I believe in heart of hearts, that the pendulum will start to swing back. So we have the insights and we have the data, but now how are we using those in a way that represents trust, that really is going to reinforce trust? So I do think the pendulum swung so far, and it's starting to come back, and I think that it's going to feel awkward for some people, like that, for individuals that have grown up in the more transactional type of philanthropy, of like being very vulnerable and like, realizing that, I mean, EQ wins all, like really, I mean, from a gift officer perspective. So being armed with data, but being extremely, bright in your ability to actually connect with someone. And so it's a new world where you have to balance both. The science, I think, is kind of an equally important plateau to the art now, whereas science for most of my career was way down here. It got to the point where it's like everyone was just trying to find out how to get more revenue. But now it's like, how do we operate in this world where we're informed by data, but still extremely personal?
So how are we going to do that? I mean, really, how are we going to do that? Because are some of these tools really about listening better? And if so, are we doing a better job of listening?
You have to accept that it won't work every time. Not everybody is going to be able to make the transition. Once you accept that, then you say, okay, what kind of a transition do folks need to make? And I think that's where a lot of the hope is, certainly from my perspective, that the technology can aid in that. Because you're just like a business, a nonprofit, the most expensive costs are the labor costs. But you have faith in humankind, and if you can help folks, you can guide them towards the better decisions to make. I think you have a chance of getting the next level of productivity. And when I say productivity, I'm talking about having the time to engage people, to frankly earn their trust. Absent that, there's a trajectory here where if you continue this way, the donor pool continues to get smaller, and it would seem to accelerate the disappearance of philanthropy.
And I think with that, I totally agree. I think with that, the level setting aspect of this, can we do it? I actually had a presentation last week and someone said, well, sounds like good old fashioned major gift work. It is at scale. Like you can't, good old fashioned gift work means that you hire infinite number of gift officers, meet infinite number of people. So that's not practical for any organization. So how do you take that type of work and essentially replace some of that that I would get if I met with a donor of like looking around their business or their house or realizing some of their preferences and things they do? How do you do that at scale? And so that's what data can do. It can take some of that good old fashioned major work, allow you to do it more efficiently. And I think the part for me, at least, it's our industry is, for some reason, I'm not sure about, adopted this idea that more is better. That like more donors are always better. And I have lots of robust conversations with individuals about this idea that more donors are better. And the reality, when we look at the math, actually is not true, right? So donors that you acquire that give time actually often cost you money, but donors that stay with you, that are truly in it to win it with you and in that kind of partnership, have 15 times lifetime value. So that framing is very difficult. I mean, that is in the pyramid to what our industry is really positioned as. More is better, the big pipeline you can, so that you can foster all those relationships. It's expensive. It's also not practical. So get better at essentially a less is more strategy. The ROI will be higher. Your burnout will decrease. So there's a lot of benefit to that, but it's a pretty big paradigm shift from what our industry has been, thinking about for the last, or the way it's been operating for the last years.
More is not better if, sorry, were you?
No, go ahead. Jump in there.
More is not better if you're going to lose 70% of the donors.
Right.
More is better for the vendor that helped get you the donors. It's the nonprofits have been working on a false assumption that if you go out and you get a lot of donors, then what you're going to get in there is you're going to get people that are going to move up the proverbial gift pyramid, and that's going to be the pipeline for the rest of the organization. Just time and time again, we go into these organizations. What would you do with those donors? We didn't do anything. We asked them for other small gifts. Well, you missed the boat because 70% of them bailed on you. What are you going to do now? What's the answer?
Yes.
Let's go get some more. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, the definition of madness, really, like, kind of, right? In a way,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
So,
Doing the same thing, only more of it. Yes.
It's the classic quality versus quantity. And I think that when we get obsessed with building the big tent, that we focus our metric around how many people are engaged instead of the quality of the connection and relationship that exists. We are chasing the wrong indicator. We have aligned incentives poorly. And so even talking to a lot of boards say, you know, we need the big tent, we need more people. Instead, we need to start doing a much better job determining people's affinity, desire to move forward with us. It is a totally different set of metrics. So we've got to also be conscious of what do we want out of this relationship? How are we moving forward? Because sometimes I think we are chasing something that is not really what is in the best interest of our organization.
Actually, if I could just add to that, I think, you know, Betsy mentioned the board. I mean, everything that we're talking about sounds easy and like, oh yeah, well, we could, you know, this makes sense, we could do that. But at the end of the day, most CDOs or most organizations report up to a board and sometimes CEO or a CEO of a hospital. And so really the conversation has to really resonate this idea that, you know, this is all about, you know, fostering deep authentic connection. Have to really go all the way to the board and to the CEO to allow for different success. And what I mean by that is, as you alluded to, is if the definition of success is only revenue, then you're forced to look at a better strategy at any cost. I just need more donors at any cost to hit my annual goal. Versus what one of the key measures of success is net increases in retention and revenue. Revenue follows with that. So, I mean, that's a really big shift. And I know for myself and many CDOs that I've known throughout my career, they live and die, or they keep their job or not, by hitting an annual revenue number. And that's something that really, you know, needs to switch so that organizations can be more donor centric. Meaning that we don't push donors into our timeline, but we engage and partner with donors and really allow them to give in their timeline that's aligned with the organization.
So let's just say we are failing in industry, whether you work in healthcare or social services or education, we are failing at when donor retention rates are steady at about 43% per year. It is inadequate. People are walking away because they do not feel appropriately engaged, appropriately thanked. They don't feel ownership in the work they're doing. They don't feel that we've articulated, that we've actually arrived at the vision that we have given them. So if we were going to lean in around a metric, you're right, instead of chasing revenue, maybe what we need to be chasing is substantive quality of relationship as demonstrated by the number of people who stay with us. Because if people stay with us, then those relationships are going to grow and ultimately, in all likelihood, become more investment in the organization.
I just want to be about the whole thought for a second. I know that a few people have mentioned some issues with audio. And so if you hear something specific, not being able to hear some voice, anything like that, please let us know. We'll try to make adjustments for you. Go ahead.
The irony is not lost on me, is that if you ran a business with 43% retention rate, you would lose your job.
Right.
But yet the boards are heavily represented from people from business. So where did the message get screwed up? Businesses don't do that themselves. So why are nonprofits doing that?
Well, why is that? I mean,
it's a conspiracy. I think that's what it is.
Conspiracy.
Well, I mean, it's not, I've heard thought about board members because these are often really brilliant people. They've been successful in whatever they do. And then they join a board, and then what happens? Because it's not just this issue; it's a whole bunch of decisions that they make. Do they feel like there should be, or is a difference in rules about?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a great article in Harvard Business Review a few years ago that said most nonprofit directors said that they did check their expectations at the board, that they were willing to tolerate things in the nonprofit they never would have tolerated in the business. And so, why, again, to your point, why is that we have a different set of expectations of what success looks like, quality looks like? If you ran a business, restaurant, anything else, and more than half of your customers who walked in today were never going to walk in again, you would think it was egregious. You would have a correction plan. You would be on it. And yet we say, oh, woe is us. It happens every year. It's where we are.
Yeah. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again.
I mean, this is a new, thing either. I mean, Dan Pallotta in his famous TED Talk from however long, there's being two rules, right? I mean, so the nonprofit sector almost, for its own reasons, has fallen behind the private sector in whether it's adopting technology or investing in different infrastructure and things, because there's always that pull of whatever money we put into innovation or whatever money we put into something that's quote unquote risky means that's less dollars that go back into our mission. And that's, and I understand that that's actually an important consideration, is that, you're a nonprofit exists to fulfill a mission, right? And then when the mission is fulfilled, then you can shut down. But at the same time, the argument is, what if we invest and we can exponentially do more by investing in some of these things? And again, the retention issue is just profound, yet at least in American philanthropy, that has not really been a topic of conversation until, honestly, like the pandemic. The sustainer started becoming, and repeat donors started becoming more of a conversation, which is kind of new, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, been around Europe forever, but kind of new here after the pandemic. Now, all of a sudden, people are acutely aware of retention, where, I mean, you've been in the field, we've 20 plus years, and we've not seen conversation to this degree, except in direct mail.
I have to ask you a question, though, kind of flipping this around a little bit. One of the discussion points in our field is, well, if you reduce the number of people in a portfolio, for example, in higher education, like the David Lively School of Fundraising, and he's brilliant, and it's been very successful where he is, then you'd achieve this much more effective relationship building and much greater revenues. All of that makes sense, and he's proven it, and those who have followed that model have seemed to be successful. But then it begs another question, because if one of the things we're trying to do is get closer to the communities where we are, and now you've gone from 200 people that you know a little bit to 45 you know really well, what's happening to all the other people who feel like they're wearing your sweatshirt? You're part of your brand. You got served at your hospital. They went to your clinic. They went on your walk, and now they aren't getting that level of service. Is there a way that, whether it's our technology or our process or our teaching, that we can start building relationships both with the 45, but now with everybody else? Because we've been ignoring a lot of people for a long time.
Absolutely. I do think it's a both and, that, I joke with gift officers all the time that if you had as many people in your portfolio as you had Facebook friends, you would never get anywhere. Like, think about, I'm not a Facebook person. On Facebook, what is the depth of relationship? You have a lot of people there. Like, you have a lot of people you're connected to, you're linked to, but do you know what they're thinking about? Do you know what they care about? Do you know what moves them, motivate them? Do you know why they make the choices? Most people know. And so I do think we've got to make portfolio size small enough that we can have substantive relationships. But you're right, there need to be other venues where we're identifying new partners, where we're stewarding kind of ongoing giving. I don't know that those are major gift officer portfolios. I think those are happening in other parts of the enterprise, where we're engaging people at different levels of opportunity and figuring out who wants to move from kind of, waving that foam finger saying they're a fan, to really be a partner.
Right. I want to make sure we can weave in some of the conversation from the audience. And some are just comments. I think Taylor had said, for an organization that does not currently have a great patient program established, what are some of the key first steps? Get it off the ground and find prospects. And part of that, of course, who's a prospect and how do you do this? So who wants to tackle that one?
Any of us could.
Well, let me first, I say we want to share something more insightful. I shared earlier in one of the sessions that, years ago, when I really did what a Grateful Patient program was, I knew there was a correlation between involvement with clinicians and fundraising. And had no training. I really didn't understand the terminology, the concepts, but I did know that the more we did, the more money we raised. And so we literally started tracking in Excel. We essentially assigned clinicians that seemed to be good advocates for what we were doing, and we would assign a metric for how many visits, whether it was a phone call or in-person visit with that clinician happened, and then we would measure that. And sure enough, of course, fast forward, what we were doing is building the building blocks of a Grateful Patient program. But I think just starting simple, like it really comes down to relationship. And for most people that have worked in healthcare philanthropy will probably admit at the end of the day, if they're done with their job and I left that part of the field, the part of most was having those relationships with clinicians. It's challenging to build trust, but when you do, it's literally the highlight of the job. So I think just starting and putting yourself out there and coming alongside, working alongside clinicians, at least for me, is how you get started.
I think we've got to be respectful and smart. So I'm gonna wander the woods a little bit here. Then say, most folks that I've seen start a Grateful Engagement program, they focus on finding gregarious rock star physicians in all different areas of specialty. And I think that if you're going to be effective, you cannot take a scattershot approach. You need to first know what is the highest and best intention of your organization to affect change. So let's say your vision is to really elevate oncology or elevate cardiology. Focus there first, because you need to follow first the mission and where the mission needs to be addressed. And if we know that oncology is the area that we want to influence, then we need to partner with the oncologists who most likely have the relationships to the patients who have an interest in giving in that area. And so I think it starts just being very smart and strategic. The other thing that I would tell you, frankly, just from being a cancer patient myself, you walk in the door the day before they say to you, you have cancer. And you may be interested in that, or you may not. But the day somebody looks at you and says, you have cancer, you have heart disease, you have a bum knee that needs to be fixed by orthopedics, you go from being a bystander to being an owner. And so that acceleration of just intention and engagement, that's why I think the whole, definitely with gratitude, people are doing things for you you could not do for yourself. But the timeline of engagement is so truncated because this suddenly is extremely personal and extremely meaningful to you. And so it is building on who you are as a person, what your identity is, what you now care about. And so I think we've got to keep that in mind, that their headspace has changed in a dramatic way in a very short period of time. And so how do we thoughtfully approach them from their new vantage point and ask them to be our partners in building a better organization to now serve their own needs and future needs?
Bill, do you want to add any of this?
No, mine would be much more tactical. Mine would be much more, so whatever I suggest at this point doesn't exist unless you do what these two just said, okay? So let's start. I'm not that naive. The questions seem really straightforward. How do you get them started? How do you get the information started? Yes, this is the groundwork that needs to be done. From a geek perspective, from a data perspective, take a look at your existing donor histories. Find out which physicians were working when you got the most gifts that led to, and here now we're talking about long
Let's see. Oh, wow. Thank you for staying here. Okay, this place is great, but obviously the ocean is interfering with the internet.
It's a Florida thing, isn't it?
It's a Florida thing. Governor
We had to have
DeSantis
some reason that people
intercepting
wouldn't
us.
all move here.
Go on.
That was it.
That was it? It's by the internet?
Yes, that's it.
I think
I
think what really happened is you were telling people how to make a great gratefulation program, and they had to cut you off. It's very competitive.
Check Nathan's feed over there. See if he knocked it off. Yeah, it just was a very practical approach. It's basically saying, if you want to build a grateful patient program, do all the groundwork that Nathan and Betsy said. And from a tactical perspective, sure, use DonorSearch, right? But you can do it on your own just by taking a look at what's in your donor database, figure out which physicians are involved. And it's a very coarse approach, but it will get you started. Find out which physicians that folks are giving to, and start there. You've got somebody who people like enough that they're going to give. Right. It's like the first of 10 steps.
But it sounds like maybe it's the step that people aren't taking.
Well, there's no easy way to do it.
It's a lot of work. Right. Do that at scale. I mean, it's essentially what AI does at scale for you. But yeah, Bill's talking about the mechanics of it are really just getting to mine your data and understand who's there. Now, most hospitals have around 1 million patient visits a year. So that becomes the very quick limitation to like, oh, well,
because Excel only goes to 1 million records.
Yeah.
Don't kid yourself. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be doing it in Excel. Nobody's going to throw it into a database and then do the calculations and stuff. You'll never get the IT attention.
But there's something that I think that you said earlier today in a session about contact reports, which is a subject you and I discussed many times.
That'd be a great business idea. What do you think?
I think so. Which is that people tend not to fill them out, and that you've been in an environment where it's one of the things that you changed immediately when you went there and fill them out. Also, the technology has made it so not everybody has to use Excel. There are systems that people use so that they will actually do this if they're told to do it, if they're shown why it's valuable. So maybe where does that fit all this? You find the right people who can tell the story in an authentic way, can really engage with people that things that matter, like the oncologist. Then what? I mean, people have to take a note so you can figure out what's next. Right? You have to build a relationship over time.
I mean, but let's be clear, like people will only do what, if they're shown how to do it and they're even told the benefits of to do it, they won't do it until they're evaluated based on that being a metric. So, I mean, really it's like, you know, what is the phrase, like what gets measured happens or gets done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I mean, that's just one lever you can establish very quickly, because in this world, in the world that Bill's describing as well, you know, you're making decisions based on the data. Okay. And if that is not a performance metric or a measure of success on how you're evaluated in terms of your job, then why would it? I mean, most of my career it was, well, this person filled out a lot of contact reports in case he won the lottery. I won't say hit by a bus, but like that we used to say that. But in case he won the lottery, he didn't show up tomorrow. There had to be some history of all the donor meetings he's had over the last 2 years, or she. And so moving from that culture of like a nice to have to data's informing our day-to-day work, something that has to happen. And so the story I shared was I went into an organization that had 18% of their contact reports were filed in 3 days. Most were never filed. But in 1 month of saying this is a metric that leadership is looking at, and by the way, will be distributed to the entire team so everyone will see that contact reports have to be filed in 3 days. And we went from 18% to 84% in 1 month. So
and what did that do to revenues?
Oh, I mean, well, actually, that's a building block. So that doesn't impact revenue directly. What it does is it allows you to get to a KPI that is more directly to revenue. But if you don't do that as a building block, what are you measuring? Like,
does it also influence the relationship building so you get to retention? I mean, so
well, sure. Activity is engagement is a function of how often you interact with the person, you know, truthfully and transparently and with authenticity and all that. If you're not documenting that you're interacting with the person, then you have no idea when it's happened. I mean, you can't measure activity.
Right.
Well, if you can't measure activity, you certainly can't measure engagement. I mean, you could do a handful, 5 or 10 people, but you can't do it big.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's perhaps a better question to ask rather than the revenue side of it. If you have a greater activity and the activity is genuine, that's the building block. That's the first step. Then you have to work on message. You have to make sure that the people know what they're talking about and they're communicating that. Yeah, it's
again, it takes it from that nice to have and what a great thing that person did by filing these reports to measuring, quantifying it, so that you can focus on metrics that drive revenue, like face-to-face visits and other meaningful moves. But if the culture is that data is not that important, it's nice to have, this world, in this like extremely AI data world that we live in, and it's not becoming less, that is very hard to compete in. The business as usual is not a successful business strategy.
Because there, Betsy. So what is it? What is the real threat now to organizations that are not taking data and data tools seriously? And what kinds of things are you talking to people about that will help them overcome this kind of ridiculous, continual, doing the same thing over and over and over?
If you are not utilizing data, you are going to butt up against so many constraints that are going to hamper your ability to move forward. That, without using data, you do not have the ability to make objective decisions around how you're going to focus your time, how you're going to thoughtfully engage people in a tailored way. Like, you've got to have that mechanism in order to do it. The other thing that we know is a reality. There is not a fund development shop in this country that is saying, wow, we have too many people here. We have people who are just sitting around, sitting on their hands. Nobody has enough workforce to be able to address this in a meaningful way. So it even goes to what Nathan's saying, like, how are you going to do this at scale? If you're going to do this in a meaningful way at scale, you have got to leverage the tools that are available through data, business intelligence, AI, whatever bucket you want to put it in.
People. We're back.
Chapter 3. This is not going to be the War and Peace of the Philanthropy Mastermind series, but it may be close. And so stick with us, because we were in the middle of this really passionate kind of description of this stuff. Okay, so where do we start again? Where do we?
Day 3.
Day 3. So let me ask you about this. Okay, so we're talking about the problems and we're talking about potential solutions, but we're being somewhat general about it. I know it's hard to get really specific. We keep talking about AI here and everywhere else as a way to address this, but we don't often define it well. We've tried to do it in a series a little bit, and we don't specifically talk about which tools are going to enable people to do exactly what. Before I ask you to see if you can define it and help people understand how they can go from where they are to using AI as a bridge to where they need to be. let me pose one more riddle, which is that when it comes to these issues, people often, at least in my career, I've seen people say, well, here's the problem. So we're going to use technology as a solution. But what they often do is use technology as a way to avoid relationship building rather than to enhance it. So they're going to say, well, I'll just send out more of something, or I'll just, my favorite is the digital receipt. So let me just ask you all this question. Of the gifts that you made at year's end, what percentage do you think sent you an actual physical letter of any type that said thank you?
Might be zero. Might be zero.
I think I got one.
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel? Forget about your profession. How does that make you feel?
I think I want to do it again.
Now that's what I expect Zoom to kick us off after a response like that. Okay, so no, but seriously, and you know, we're all people. We're giving away money. We don't have to do that. We love these causes, but we don't have to give.
Yeah. No, it makes you feel like you've been ignored, and that that creates the seed of doubt that goes into, well, what are you doing with the money? Right. And if you can't even tell me, right.
The sad thing is, like, we're all donors. We work in philanthropy, but think about the 51% of Americans that don't give.
Right.
That the reason why they don't give is because of things like this that we put up with because we give. I mean, honestly, like, that's probably the biggest deterrent of, like, well, you don't really need my money, or if I give, I'll never hear back, or if I give, it won't. How do I know it went into the right place? They don't give. 51% of America does not give to nonprofits.
And it used to be 75%
not long ago,
and now it's
20 years ago, or 2006.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a major shift. We have an enormous amount of tolerance for this behavior because we care about the industry so much. But at the end of the day, we know that it's not right. We know that we could do better, and I think most people feel like they could do better. But again, we've adopted this, again, broke record, like, the more is better, and that's taken our view off of really leaning into the people that care about us, that we can build those authentic relationships with, back to not the way it used to be, using data just the way it used to be, but a bit faster and a bit scale. And I guess that ties into your AI question. That's what AI can do for you. Now, AI has we could spend hours talking about the different applications of AI in our sector that we use in different areas. But for the most part, AI is evaluated on creating precision and personalization. And if you can create precision to do more of that good old-fashioned matrix work faster, more efficiently, with better results, because you've got AI doing the background work for you, or you're using AI to create that personalization, whether it's in the communication and some of these aspects of, like, helping, communicate in a way that, doing an impact report that really ties to what I care about. That's technology that exists today, that organizations need to harness to be able to do. And
it's not out of reach of many, if not most, organizations.
At the point, there's really no excuse. Like, at this point, I mean, all the way down. I mean, even DonorSearch is one example. Lots of organizations, but we have 3 different tiers of AI that could be used for the very smallest of small organizations, all the way up to the largest large. So it's absolutely in reach.
And we're not talking about ChatGPT here. There are sessions on that we will be doing.
Tune in Monday.
Yes, exactly. But these are applications that are specific to this field, available here, maybe some other companies too. But the main point is to make our work more efficient, more directly relational, to help people to rebuild those relationships we've been shedding. To places like crowdfunding, which I guess people must have felt were more personal.
Yeah.
What I've got to say one thing: if you haven't seen it, your talk when you received the Cy Seymour Award for AHP from AHP is not only one of the most touching talks I've ever heard in philanthropy, but you and articulate, but you also get right to the heart of the thing we're discussing, which is why you do this.
Thank you.
Well, not everybody has the experience that you outline in that, which I would encourage everybody to watch. But you get to the heart with any of those stories that you tell. You get to the heart of why people give. And so I'm curious about this, about how um, how you take that kind of experience and then with clients, with people you talk to, from the podium, how you get them to then integrate that kind of level of engagement, whether it's through technology or just day-to-day practice.
I think all of us have had experiences that were very deeply personal, that were transformational, that changed our worldview, that affected us in deep ways, but we are often not vulnerable enough to share them. And so I think probably most people working in a charitable organization, they have a story that's either one of their own, of their families, every board member coming in, executives, they probably all have a story. I think part of what we've got to do is have the courage sometimes to have this conversation about why this is deeply human work, about why it really matters in a human sense. And I think that if we can just open ourselves up, we can have better conversations. I do think it's one of the weird things almost that even happened in COVID, that in the middle of COVID, you saw people having really great conversations even over Zoom, because I think we all were feeling so vulnerable that we were willing to kind of let our guard down and meet people as humans and say, how are you doing? Here's how I'm doing. How are you feeling? Let's talk about what's going on. And I think if we can weave in all of those personal experiences, owning our vulnerability, having that courage to put ourselves out there, I think we'll have better conversations with people.
And can we also implement that through the innovation that we're trying to bring to market? I mean, how do we do that?
How do we do what?
Bring this kind of level of intensity and engagement and personality, where we're telling our own stories, and make that part of our practice and the tools that we offer. Is that what we're doing through AI now?
I mean, it's probably, again, tune in for the ChatGPT conversation next week. But I think robots and AI can't replace authenticity and transparency and EQ. I think they can guide you to start a conversation in a way that it kind of like kickstarts or allows you to, like, a shortcut to, like, hey, we are aligned in values because the data shows us we're aligned. But at the end of the day, like, we're a highly relational business, and trust is not built between humans and robots. Trust is built between humans and humans. And so, at least for me personally, like, that's the part of this industry that's so unique and special, that while we could have, better swings at bat that are going to be, that are going to get us a bit further faster, it really comes down to people connecting with people and, having a vision for something that can be achieved by both coming together, that in true partnership, that together you could accomplish something that neither could do on their own. And I don't know, that's, I guess, for us, like, those transformative moments for me of like, wow, I really matter. I made a difference and this organization relies on me. When you have that sense of responsibility to an organization, you're going to stay with them, right? So because you feel it, you feel like you're part of it, that their success is built in part by your partnership versus a transaction.
So I'm trying to think of how it is that when you are wrapping up this meeting, the retreat, what kind of message you hope to send people off with when it comes to this integration of a message, which is you got to get to know people where they are, really get to know them as who they are and engage them, and how to use these tools to ensure we're able to do that in a more productive and efficient action.
I think we advocate that it's very doable and it's just around the corner and it's affordable, and some cases we don't even charge for it, just to kind of get folks acclimated to it. But I wouldn't take it for granted. One of the efforts that we're pursuing is to try to do it at scale, which would be literally across an entire CRM. And the upside potential there is that you positively impact the fundraising choices that thousands of nonprofits make. But just something that, as an example, and we'll go unnamed at this point, we literally had a discussion. One of the things that we all know is, fundraisers know it intuitively, that when people engage through activities, that's the beginning of measuring engagement. Literally, we were having a discussion with the CRM, people that publish the software. And when we asked them to give us the activity information, they just kind of looked down and said, "No, we're not going to do that." And it's like, but you do understand that this is very predictive and this would be very helpful and everything. But there's no infrastructure. While they did record activity, each of the nonprofits did it differently, just because it wasn't considered a priority. To your point, setting it as accountability. This is not a gimme at this point. There are still there are a lot of structural issues that are still built into the process that haven't been overcome. As we were saying today, the time to start is start today. Find out what these impediments are going to be, and give yourself some time to deal with them. But it's not all just sitting there waiting for everybody to pursue. So, but we'll take a swing at it.
Running into people this morning after we just did the first couple of sessions, people said, "Wow, I already have like a notebook. I've taken copious notes. I have 25 things that I need to do." And I think part of what you've got to walk away from, whether you're on a webinar or whether you're at a conference, is that you can't do 25 things well. And so distill it down to the 3 things that you're going to be committed to, that you believe are really going to move the dial, and go do those things exceptionally well, and then figure out what the next things are going to be that you're going to do. Because I think we tend to get overwhelmed and distracted, and we don't have enough resources. And so if we're not very focused and deliberate in what we're doing, we will not get anywhere. So find a couple things, commit to them, do them well.
Like that,
actually, both of what Betsy and Bill just said, I would echo. I would say, recognizing that our industry is at a crossroads, which is how we started our session this morning, that if we go down one way, it won't end well for anyone. So with that said, there's a million things that you could do, but Bill just said it, starting is key. Start where you start, and then, literally just, move things forward. But resting on this idea that this is not, that the environment's not changing, or that, things are just going to be okay if we just hunker down, it won't. The trend line is far too long it's very pronounced that if we continue doing things the same way, the result for everyone is not great. So starting is key, and then prioritize your effort.
Well, with that, I want to first of all thank those who stuck around during all those interruptions, and there are a bunch of you, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And apologize for losing all your questions along the way. We did want to integrate them, but we had no way of doing it. So maybe what I could do is ask each of our fine panelists also to tell you where you can find out more about them. And if you want to shoot a question their way, either they or one of the people working with them, I'm sure would be happy to get back to you. They all have a lot of insights to offer, and not just here in Florida. So maybe we'll start with Betsy Chapin Taylor. Where can people reach out to you?
Please find me on LinkedIn, Betsy Chapin Taylor on LinkedIn, or Betsy@AccordantHealth.com.
Thank you. Bill?
Bill at DonorSearch.net.
And I'm on LinkedIn, Nathan Chappell, or Nathan.Chappell at DonorSearch.net.
Great. And I want to thank all of you again for hanging out with us during our multi-part session today. Hopefully, the next time we manage to get people like this together, a 3-part series.
Sounds impressive.
We're going to release these all as 3-minute videos. Yes, animation from Adult Swim, so watch for that. Hopefully, I didn't just violate copyright law or something. This should be a lot of fun, but this is a really important topic, and a lot of it's being covered right here. So my thanks to Accordant for providing a forum like this, not just for this discussion, for all the things going on in the next room, and obviously DonorSearch for leading discussion as they do every day on this issue of AI and the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So with that, thanks for showing up. We'll look forward to you next time. Take care.